exactly 1 p.m. Yes, recording in progress, noted. We need to start. It's exactly 1 p.m. Stockholm time. And I know we are working between different time zones, but on behalf of International IDEA and the entire Wyde Women's Leadership Team, which is Women and Youth Democratic Engagement, I would really like to welcome all of you who are already here joined on time. The main issue I want to highlight is that this webinar, this event is about reconnecting again with our stakeholders. We have made sure as the Wyde Women's Leadership Team that we keep engaged with our stakeholders, which are you, the participants. But not only you as the participants, but equally important are the stakeholders that we are working with for producing knowledge products, such as the fact sheets that we are going to validate. So with that, I'm sure I've met quite a number of you in different contexts, but just to restate, I'm Rumbidzai Kandawasvika-Nhundu, and I'm the theme lead for Gender Equality, Empowerment and Inclusion at International IDEA, together with my colleagues who I'm sure I hope are online, Pierre, who works on our I Know Politics platform, Kiara on the Young Women's Empowerment Academies, Dimas with me on the dialogues, and other colleagues, Amna and Sifiso, who are of course not able to join today, and as well as Pretty. With that, I would really want us to get some practical clarifications, because we realize the power of language and we don't want to undermine it. We've got English. This webinar will be in English, French, and Spanish. So kindly choose the language that you are empowered to work within, so that we don't have language as a barrier for these important conversations. And another key aspect for us is if you can drop in the chat so we know who you are and where you're coming from, because we might not be able, it's not going to be feasible for us to do a round of introductions. The main people that I will introduce are the presenters for the fact sheets who have worked with us. And we have got a team of 3 consultants, but they are not just consultants, they are gender equality, women's empowerment, human rights advocates, and practitioners in their own right. That's why they are able to do this work with us. So with that, I hope we are all set in terms of the languages, and people can hear and be able to follow. And we would really like to request that you keep your mic on mute if you're not having the floor, so that we can all be in sync and we don't have any interruptions in the backgrounds. And one of the things I also need to point out is that we will try to make sure that our presenters feature the key aspects of the fact sheets in 20 to 25 minutes at most. And then we have a discussion after every fact sheet highlights. And we have requested some of the Wyde women participants, stakeholders, to be respondents or discussants, respondents rather, for the issues that will be highlighted by our presenters. With that, I would like to introduce our presenters in the order of the presentations that we are going to have, because we'll start off with Salman, who is going to present the findings, the key issues, the building blocks, the area of the problem, so why male engagement matters. And Salman is a gender equality political participant and participation in gender-based violence prevention and response specialist with over 15 years of international experience. And this is just to point out that Salman has worked with on diverse projects, including communities with regards to youth decision makers, and his career spans collaboration with entities such as International IDEA, UN Women, UNFPA, UNDP, and he's been part of global campaigns such as Men Engage Alliance, Unite, and He for She. So Salman is the one who will speak first on the male engagement fact sheet. After Salman, we'll get to the fact sheet on violence against women in politics. And the fact sheet on violence against women in politics will be presented by Mariatu. Mariatu is a human rights, gender equality, and governance expert as well, with more than 15 years of experience across the world, and but with a particular focus on Southern Africa. She does a lot of work on social norms transformation, health equity, and social justice. I will highlight that Maria too has worked with UNFPA, Gender Links, Femnet, Civicus, and the Commonwealth, as well as the African Union, the African Development Bank, and the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So Maria too will speak to the issue of violence against women in politics. Our third panelist and presenter and consultant is Caroline. Caroline is a recognized thought leader with over 20 years of experience in advancing gender equality, women's political empowerment in terms of participation and representation, and inclusive governance globally. Caroline has been involved in key initiatives in terms of like launching the Know the Costs initiative to combat violence against women in politics. And she has co-authored the publication Men, Power and Politics, which is one of the first resources that focused on engaging male political leaders to advance gender inclusive democracy. Caroline has also served as the Senior Gender Governance and Team Director in the USAID Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, Governance, and as a Senior Gender Advisor and Deputy Director for Gender, Women, and Democracy at the National Democratic Institute. Caroline will present the fact sheet that focuses on the global context and status of young women's political participation and representation. With those introductions, I'd like to hand over now to Salman. And Salman, I've done very well. My introduction was supposed to be 10 minutes, so I'm already sparing 2 minutes into this webinar. So let's save that so that we can have time for discussions. I see we have about 75 participants online, and I would really want to applaud us and all these Wyde women's leadership stakeholders for making this time. So over to you, Salman, please, in 20 to 25 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try in earnest to follow your example. I would also like to start my reflections by expressing my enormous and sincere gratitude to International IDEA team, in particular Rumbidzai and Sifiso and other team members for their guidance, for their reviews and recommendations. My debt is due to Caroline Hubbard, who's one of the co-presenters today, for your very detailed peer review of my draft of the fact sheet and the recommendations. I'm also very grateful to Rwanda Men's Resource Center in Rwanda for facilitating my research, but as well as collation of case studies, interviews, and a survey that I carried out. Just a few words with regards to the purpose of the fact sheet. This fact sheet is a practice-driven resource developed to translate insights emerging from International IDEA and women and youth democratic engagement, that's Wyde, supported dialogues, leadership, academies and multi-stakeholders engagements. I've been part of some in Nairobi, Kathmandu, Sri Lanka, last year in August and September. So in that sense, it really focuses on strengthening male engagement for advancing the equitable participation, representation, leadership of women in politics, while also addressing the social norms and institutional dynamics that continue to privilege male authority and constrain the voice, visibility, and agency of women across decision-making and the political spectrum. Today, I'm focusing on two key questions. Rumbidzai has already spelled them out. One is with regards to the intersectionality of social norms and male engagement, and the second one is with regards to what are the key enablers for male engagement. The fact sheet itself presents subsections very, very quickly. The subsections are, for example, on context, politics, power, and gender. There is a subsection on why focus on men, masculinities, patriarchy, and leadership cultures. Then there's a subsection on intersectionality and conceptualization. There's a subsection on gender norms and power dynamics, global and regional overview, data and trends, which is a research part of it. There is a section, male engagement as transformative practice, which collates a lot of resonance from the dialogues that we have held. And I know that many of our participants are also participating today in this webinar. So I thank you also, and you would hear the resonance of your reflection, your wisdom, and your words across the presentation. There is a section on pushback and resistance. And last but not the least, there is the way forward. So what I'm going to do now is to upload the presentation. It'll just take me less than a minute, a few seconds. So let me just bring the presentation up first. Thank you. Just move. So I've already talked about the building blocks of the fact sheet, really, but the key building blocks really have been the international idea and Wyde supported dialogues, leadership academies, and multi-stakeholder engagements. And I'm reminded of some of the overarching key reflections that have really built the normative framework, as it were, for this presentation and the fact sheet. And I'm reminded of the words of one of the participants who said, engaging men is not about enlisting support for women. It is about recognizing and reshaping the power structures that men are part of and have the responsibility to change. But there was also a huge focus on debunking restrictive social norms and gender norms. And in that respect, I would recall one of the reflections from the Leadership Academy that I attended and was part of, where one of the participants reminded us that restrictive social norms do more than limit women. They define who is seen as a leader, and until they are challenged, equality will remain constrained. When leadership is shaped by restrictive norms, equality becomes conditional. Debunking those norms is the first step towards making it universal. We'll move on to the next slide. So just to remind ourselves that what we heard time and again from our participants, the interviews and the case studies, the disc review, reminding us that while there is always a rhetoric in the political sphere of meritocracy, that is, of merit, or of reserved seats and quotas, so whether it is meritocracy or it is the discourse on reserved seats or quotas, the result and the findings and the evidence reminds us that politics is never gender neutral. Women's exclusion is not a gap. It is a system reinforced by norms, institutions, and power structures. There are some statistics given in it. I will not go through them. You'll have the presentation to have a look at those stats also. Moving on, just to remind ourselves what the real problem statement is, what the real challenge is, and where does it emanate from? What is the genesis of it, really? Power, norms, patriarchy, masculinity. But this is not only about participation and representation and leadership. It really is about distribution of power. Leadership is still coded as masculine in political systems that are built to sustain it. Quotas do increase numbers, but they rarely shift the real authority. So in that sense, in many parts of the world, including the country where I'm based currently, there is a huge discourse and rhetoric of reserve seats and of quotas. And recently, in the region, a country tried to increase the quotas and reserve seats, which was through a bill that was resisted by the women's movement and human rights activists. And it was resisted not because there's a problem with reserve seats and quotas. It was resisted because they could see through that that bill was to enable certain political parties to have more seats rather than empower women, and in particular, rather than distribute the power. Political violence, intimidation, resource inequality continue to persist globally. Social norms consistently linked to authority with patriarchy and masculinity. And the question is, without transforming norms, women may enter politics. But the evidence is showing us that the power remains out of reach. Decision-making remains out of reach. If men dominate power, they must also be part of transforming it. This is one of the key messages that we got from the dialogues that we held. So in that sense, male engagement was highlighted as a game changer. Gender equality being not a women's issue, but being a power issue, the issue of distribution of power. So what we heard time and again was men are not just participants in the discourse of promoting women's equitable participation, representation, and leadership in decision-making and political stratosphere. But men are gatekeepers. They are often custodians of political systems and norms. And we do get evidence from United Nations, UN Women's Dialogue, Reflection, Insight, Learning, and Sharing exercises known as drills that show that structured reflection builds accountable male allies. Many men remain silent sympathizers due to peer pressure and social section. We'll talk about that in detail in a moment. But what does meaningful engagement even mean? And the consensus that we have received by way of this long exercise of collating case studies, interviews, surveys, dialogue sessions, consultations, conversations is, number one, challenging discriminatory social norms and debunking them. Number two, sharing power and decision-making, easier said than done. Redefining leadership beyond patriarchy. Male engagement does not dilute feminism, and that was a very important point that was made. It actually dismantles patriarchy and its roots very quickly. In terms of intersectionality, the path to transformative democracy, representation alone is not enough. Transformation is the goal. So let it not be understood that participation, representation, even leadership is the goal. The goal is transformation of the systems. And what does that entail? Number one, political will. Number two, dismantling patronage systems, along with social and gender norms. Number 3, ending violence and economic exclusion of women. Number 4, reforming parties and media, structurally reforming them. And last but not the least, recognizing young women not as beneficiaries, but as right holders. And what does it mean? It means recognizing their voice, visibility, and agency. And voice referring to their own priorities and their worldview and their aspirations. And visibility referring to that not only knowing or understanding their worldview, their priorities, their lived experience, but ensuring that there is space at the decision-making table where young women represent themselves. And that is not enough, because they must be enabled, and there must be a system that enables them to claim their agency, which refers to not being seen as passive recipients of reserve or quota seats or of policies, but of active agents of changing these policies and systems, and active agents of change, a change and shift that will have bearing not only for themselves, but for the entire society, the entire democratic and governance system. Let's move on quickly. The gender norms and power, the system behind inequality, just to understand that, it's not about individual men. It is about systems that reward a kind of intergenerational set of norms that are anchored in domination, and they punish even the aspirations for equity and equality. So what does that mean in real terms, in action? Political leadership, rather than coded as masculine. Women's leadership is to be framed beyond from being seen as exceptional, conditional, even contested. And this aligns with some of the global obligations, international standards that many of the countries where acute disparities continue to persist in politics are signatories of, are ratifiers of. And that even means that not achieving that and not having meaningful transformative action towards this is violation of international law. So the international law is not silent on them. So there is, if you like, a case of the states that are signatories of and ratifiers of a number of international frameworks, whether it's CEDAW, whether it's ICCPR, or even if you begin with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that's UDHR, they invoke equity and equality in the political charge of affair. So last but not the least, evidence shows us that the sort of hyper-masculine institutions, it's not only about gender inequality, they actually lower deliberative quality. And this is coming from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and the World Bank. And the studies show with evidence time and again that gender-balanced institutions, democracies, and systems, they achieve higher trust and lower corruption. Patriarchy doesn't just harm women, it erodes trust, weakens institutions, and fails democracy itself. So just veering away from the rhetoric of whether it's women's issue, it's the issue of gender equality. Yes, all of that is true, but it is far more than that. It is about legitimacy of democratic governance and democratic systems in their own right. Male engagement from bystanders to system changes. You see, the gender equality in politics and equity will not be achieved by women alone. Power has to be actively redistributed. And what does this mean? Male engagement is not just helping women. It is co-owning democratic transformation and be one of the stakeholders and be responsible not only for the processes, but also for the consequences and the costs. What does that mean? Men must move along the continuum, that is, from silent sympathizers to occasional supporters to proactive allies to transformative actors and agents of change. And here, the fact sheet has also kind of tested by way of interviews and conversations and the survey, the engage framework that reminds us and validates, its normative framework that looks at, first of all, examining belief and privilege, calling out, naming sexism and exclusion, growing equitable leadership skills, and they don't grow out in vacuum, they grow out in an environment which is enabling and resources available to it, act to change systems and policies, giving space to women's leadership, engaging continuously with accountability. So it really is not an initiative. I know by way of projects, often there is a tendency or even inevitability. There's a constraint to break down these complex processes in smaller chewable pieces. But what we hear from the field, what we hear from the continents, time and again, is continuity, sustainability of these initiatives. And recognition that these initiatives, yes, they can be broken down into projects and smaller chewable bites, but ultimately they need to be linked with larger transformative strategies, policies, and collective action. But there is often illusion of progress as well, and performative allyship. And in many parts of the world, we continue to see that. Saying the right thing about gender equality, the right semantics, the right vocabulary, the right words, the right sound bites has never been easier, but doing them has never been rarer. So what we continue to see in performative allyship, whether it is at the political level, institutional level, whether it's systemic level or societal level, is visibility, which is nothing short of photo optics, but without accountability. There is public endorsement in paper or promulgation of policies and laws and legislation, and reinforcement remains beholden to status quo. Real allyship requires sponsoring women's leadership pipelines, challenging discriminatory practices, debunking social gender norms that are restrictive, embedding accountability mechanisms, because if power doesn't shift, nothing has shifted. No matter how powerful the words have sounded, no matter how comprehensive the legislation has been, if it's not been reinforced, if it's not been acted upon. And that's what we are learning time and again from the field and the conversations and the dialogue that we have had with various examples and case studies that are given in the fact sheet. Accountability remains one of the missing links. Engaging men without accountability doesn't transform power. Unfortunately, what the case studies are showing it, what the evidence is showing it, yes, it's heartening to see men allies and men and boys being engaged, but if it doesn't go beyond the rubric, beyond the twilight of day-to-day allyship or allyship in terms of words, wisdom, and ideas, and translate into action with accountability, it is unable to transform power. And if it is unable to transform power, it really is not just a failure. What it is even further harmful, that it recycles it. So the core principle in that sense, of which the resonances come from all the dialogues and the conversations, the interviews, the survey that I've conducted is male engagement must dismantle patriarchy, not adapt to it. And there are non-negotiables. First one is feminist leadership and women's voices must remain central. Accountability is the difference between participation and transformation. So what has worked and what will work in the light of the action that's been taken across the spectrum of countries and cities and societies that we have spoken to? Number one, institutional.
Two minutes, in 2 minutes, please.
Sure, thank you.
Sure, please.
Institutional male allyship, which means when male allyship becomes institutional, equality stops being optional and starts becoming inevitable. What does that really mean? It means individual allies start conversations in groups, in dialogues, in academies, in focus group discussions, but institutions make them irreversible. So I'm going to just come to the final slide, which is the way forward from insight to system change. And what we are reminded time and again is that we do not need more commitment on paper to gender equality. We need to redesign the very nature of power. And male engagement must move from initiatives and projects to system-wide strategic action, which is enduring and sustainable and results-oriented and is based on attitudinal change. So it calls for a focused shift from participation to power redistribution. Equality is not achieved by adding women into politics. It is achieved by transforming the system they enter into. Thank you.
Wow. Is there a way of doing clapping on Zoom? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Salman. You have raised fundamental and at the same time challenging issues which we need to deal with. I would just like to find out if some of our respondents are online. I think I can see Ibrahim, the Member of Parliament from Sierra Leone. Dr. Stanley, I don't know if you can raise your hands so that I know you're there. And I understand Jean is going to be also a respondent on behalf of our partner, Rwanda Male Resource Center, which has really been working on issues on male engagement. And I hope I can also see Curtis. I'm not so sure if Curtis is there. She's the Deputy Minister for Gender Equality from Liberia. But if you can raise your hand and probably someone can be able to stop sharing so that we can see the some of the respondents that we are asking to share their thoughts. It's very clear. It's about systems. It's about redistribution of power. You mentioned something very important, Salman. You said it's not about individual men, but systems. And this is why we need men to shift from being bystanders to systems changes. As we have said, it's a game change. It will make a big difference. Do I have Ibrahim available for your reflections in terms of the highlights of what Salman has shared? And these reflections need to be pointed in terms of the problem that he has identified, and of course the solutions, what you are able to do within your sphere of influence. Can I ask Ibrahim to speak? If he's not available, we can have Jean in the meantime. Ibrahim, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Rumbidzai. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Briefly, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I am happy to be here. Wonderful presentation, Salman. Um, what you've taught us is indeed the reality in not just um, um, poor countries, but I think even developed countries are struggling um, with this reality wherein men have a critical role to play to ensure that women are not only invited to the room, but that women are part of decision making, women are part of leadership. So, therefore, I will respond to your presentation by drawing on our context from Sierra Leone. I remember when I was in Kenya, I emphasized that our role as as male allies to women's engagement to ensure we serve as drivers to empowering women should start by reflection with ourselves as individuals. As an individual, how would you like your sister to be treated, to be talked to be related with in the workplace, in governance? How would you like your relatives as women? So you have a role from the household as an individual, and then to the national, to your community, from your household to your community, to find a way to ensure that we create the safe space for women to thrive. And then also at our own level, at national, what can we enforce? Within the context of Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone is a post-conflict country that has made tremendous efforts in creating and leveraging the room for women to thrive. For example, in 2022, Sierra Leone passed into law what we call the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, which has compelled every political party, when you are nominating members of parliament, out of 3 members of parliament, there must be a woman. So today we have about over 30% women's representation in Sierra Leone parliament, in the parliament of Sierra Leone. Also, we have over 30% of women in active and senior cabinet position. Also, in 2024, the first lady of the country, who is very determined and pushful on issues related to girls and women, through a private member bill, we introduced what we call the Prohibition of the Child Marriage Act in Sierra Leone. So that act has now banned, or is now has now been enforced, so it's now punishable, and there is no room for any girl under the 18 and to be forced into marriage. And recently, we've also passed the Child Rights Act. So there are so many legislation to promote. But the truth is that when it comes to enforcement, enforcement is a challenge always. So my message to the panel here, and to add towards what the presenter has said, is we as men, we have to do more. We've been to Senegal in that dialogue, we've been to Kenya, but what or everything that we discuss, I remember you always said, Rumbidzai, you've always told us that we have to debunk the norms, we have to debunk the social barriers that is hindering the participation. Not just the, I don't like to use the word participation, because women should not just participate, but women should lead and decide. So at our own level, currently I am the deputy chairman for the Parliamentary Committee on Youth Affairs, and this is one of the things that we are championing. When we go to the Ministry of Youth, when we go to the Youth Commission, we ask questions. What are the senior leadership positions? How many women are there? And then we are monitoring the enforcement of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act. We are monitoring the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. So these are the kind of things that I think all of us, not just Sierra Leone, but Africa and the world at large, we should realize this current contemporary time is not a time anymore to advocate. There is a saying that what men can do, women can do better. We've seen that. We've seen that in so many places. Today, we've been having a political situation in the country. It was a woman, the former president, vice president of Gambia, that led a team of international and moral guarantors to come to Sierra Leone to settle that stalemate. That's just an example of the role of women in peace building and enhancing democracy. So I'll stop here for now and maybe entertain other questions or concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Abraham. And what you raise bring the element of also the role of the legislative processes and the extent to which legislations need to be put in place, but at the same time to be implemented, because just having legislations on their own plunked in the middle of complicated social norms and perceptions, it still reinforces the over-representation of men. Like I say, the problem now is the over-representation of men and the patriarchal norms and systems that Salman is adequately addressed and featured for us to reflect on. Thank you very much for your reflections. Do we have Stanley online, Stanley Maposa, for your reflections? Or also we can give Jean from the Rwanda Male Resource Center Network to share his reflections in terms of the infectious findings and key issues that have been highlighted by Salman. I also note that there are questions in the chat, and I think one of the questions that I would like you to take note, Salman, not that you have all the answers, but for us to discuss, is something that is being shared by someone who is participating, a colleague participating from Basque Country in Spain. And the main question is, could you give us some more examples of how to involve men in equality beyond everyday work-life balance measures? Because when men are also being involved in the work-life balance matters, it enables women to have time to even consider to be in politics or public participation. So if you can think about that as well, Salman, in looking at the overall agenda on male engagement for transformative gender social norms leading to women's equal participation and representation. Like Ibrahim said, it's not just about participation, it's about representation. Thank you very much. Do we have Jean on, or maybe any other colleagues would like to share their reflections? Is Jean online? Or Dr. Stanley?
Yes, online.
Jean, you are online? Yes, please. Jean, you are representing the Rwanda Male Resource Network or Center. Please go ahead, Jean.
Okay, thank you very much for this.
We can't hear you, Jean. You are very low, your volume. At least I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
It's a bit better, but there's an echo. Can you please maybe be closer to your mic? Or
Okay, to put my, yes, let me try.
yes, Jean, can you please go ahead? Yes. Jean, we can hear you.
Right, thank you. I want just to appreciate the presentation. Really, it's a very comprehensive presentation. And maybe I think I got some keywords that I really need to be reflected about. I appreciated where he mentioned that human engagement should not be initiative, but a system-wide strategy. Maybe I'll try to share what we are doing in terms of engaging men, promoting gender equality and breaking gender social norms. What we do in one Men's Resource Center, it's a local NGO or non-governmental organization that is operating in Rwanda, and we are
Jean, hello.
Yes,
Jean,
please.
I understand the interpreters cannot hear you. Interpretation can't hear you. Maybe you can switch off your video, maybe to get stability in terms of your connectivity, because the interpreters cannot hear you. Then it will disadvantage others in terms of the power of language. Okay,
so
maybe let's try now without interpreters. Can you hear, Jean? We know the Rwanda, we know the purpose of the, yeah, we know what the Rwanda Male Resource Center network does. So please don't go into the details of describing that. Just speak to the thematic issues as highlighted and featured by Salman, because we know the resource center already.
Thank you. That we need to appreciate. We have that in Rwanda, we have one resource center. You're so sorry. You can't hear me. How can I? Can anyone hear me now?
Your connectivity is not good, Jean. Maybe you need to switch off your video because we can't even hear you and the interpretation is not working.
Okay.
Or you can put your inputs maybe in the chat.
Sorry. Okay, yes. Let me try. You can now hear me. If you don't, I'll put it in chat.
Yeah, it's a bit better, but I'm not so sure. Interpreters, can you hear, Jean? No, they can't hear you, Jean. Maybe we can ask, someone is suggesting that if you can use a headset, because I think you are using the earphones for the cell phone. Whilst you are sorting that out, can we check on Stanley? Is Stanley online for any reflections? Okay. I'm just looking in the chat to see if there are any other questions or reflections. They don't necessarily have to be questions, but reflections. One of the things I'm seeing from Aisha Mohammed is that the idea of he for she is an important one to be carried both, I think, yeah, to be carried or to be implemented along with gender by changing the narratives. By so doing, it will ensure inclusion and active representation. This is from Aisha. I don't know if Aisha would like to speak to that comment, your reflection on that, which you have put in the chat.
I have a couple of reflections, if
Yes,
it's appropriate,
please.
and towards the
Yes.
end, I'd be very happy to share those. It might be, my first reflection is that I had the very happy duty and privilege of being a peer reviewer of one of the fact sheets. And the writer of the fact sheet is with us. And that reminded me that how these individual fact sheets are so interlinked. These are not exercises in isolation. To me, it's not only finding common grounds, but I was able to, in the process of peer reviewing it, I was able to take ideas, and they were very important reminders that reminded me, oh yes, that aspect needs to be a little bit further polished in my fact sheet. And what is it that I can take? So I think one of the, for me, as one of the drafters of the fact sheets, is that how well linked all of these subtopics are, because there's one overarching topic, and it would be wonderful if these fact sheets are read in connection with one with the other, not because one leaves out something, but because the other helps you unpack and demystify an idea which may well have been not the focus idea of one fact sheet. And this is how I was helped in my own work through the exercise of peer reviewing. So it was not only for me looking at, another draft, but also taking away a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge back from it and many questions. I have just two very quick further reflections. And the first reflection is really about resources. It is about budgeting. It is about not just talking the talk, but walking the talk, as we say in the UK. Time and again, the evidence that we have collated, what we have heard from colleagues from across, countries and continents is that, yes, there are initiatives with regards to allyship. There are initiatives with regards to attitudinal change. And sometimes they also result in policy review and policy reform. However, if allyship is not costing anything, it doesn't change anything. If there is no budget for that, if there is no sustained recognition that it will not be for free forever, organizations, institutions, resource centers will have to be supported to have this work more systemically. So real engagement really means, ceding power. And that ceding power actually means financial resources, redistribution, not just sharing panels. The second resonance that I would like to bring here, also from the dialogues that we held and some of the interviews that I did, was about meritocracy. So including in the part of the world that I live and in other countries, participants who spoke to, so there was question of meritocracy, and people spoke about meritocracy. We need people of merit, and people should come on merit, and we should make sure that merit is respected. But the question remains, and when you really scratch the surface and speak to the participants through the interviews, as I did, you find out that you cannot even claim meritocracy in systems which are historically engineered to exclude.
Exactly. Because for men, who even questions whether they are of merit and they have the competence, men are in these places on the basis of potential rather than merit and performance, where
and also
women have
inclusion
to
of
be.
women.
Yeah.
So the one of the key messages that keep coming back is, if you're looking at for equity, then equity really is a precondition. It's not the enemy of merit. And that's a discourse I think we need to undertake, maybe in future dialogues, that
Sure.
equity or affirmative action is not the enemy of merit. It is fixing something that has been historically engineered to exclude. Last but not the least, and I'm so delighted it came from the men that I interviewed who said that when men advocate for women's political inclusion, they're not being progressive. They're correcting a structural deficit, which is historical. So sometimes, there is the semantics and this vocabulary of power around engagement of men as sometimes as champions or mentors or teachers and elders and great friends. So men themselves said, away from the semantics and vocabulary of power, we don't even want to hear that, sometimes we are called as progressive men. We're not progressive in that.
Okay, we seem to have lost Salman, or is it just on my part? Maybe I can Sorry, Salman, we had lost you. There was a disconnection at some point, but you were mentioning the last part I captured was when men themselves are even questioning the, the labeling, the branding that they start getting as champions and being progressive, yet they are doing what they are supposed to do, essentially, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There are several questions in the chat. Maybe we'll have to circle back if we find time, and there'll still be time, or probably these are issues that we need to follow up in the following webinars or upcoming conversations. Like you rightly said, someone, these fact sheets are not supposed to be read as standalone. It's like a module. They lead, one builds to the other. But one of the questions I'm noting is from Melina. The question is, what approaches have proven most effective in fostering genuine male engagement while minimizing resistance, especially in contexts where social norms are strongly embedded? And I think that's across the world. Probably this is something someone to address and situate within the fact sheet itself, the final publication that
One
we'll have.
word.
Yeah.
Remember my slide on engage.
Yes. Yes. And from our colleague from the Rwanda, no, this is Fazana. The question is, given that men benefit from these inequalities along these dimensions of power, what would motivate them to act as genuine allies in changing and transforming these structures? Because they are benefiting. Like we said, for women to come in, some men must go out. And there's also an input from the Rwanda Men's Resource Center, which I think we can follow up in terms of the ongoing conversations. Thank you very much. Some affirmative action is not an enemy of merit. It seeks to resolve a system engineered to exclude. This is Olive, who is reaffirming and thanking you for that, capturing that in the interview, Salman. May I now please move to our next fact sheet, which is going to be presented by Maria Tu. This is the fact sheet on violence against women in politics, or violence against women who are politically active. And for that fact sheet, after 20 to 25 minutes again for you, Maria Tu, you will have, we hope we can get the following respondents. I hope they are online, Chikas and Ali and Nevedade, to speak to the issues that you raise with regards to the fact sheet development and the key issues on violence against women in politics and its intersectionality with gender social norms. Over to you, Mariatu. It's about 2 minutes to 2, so maybe at 20 past 2, please. You can conclude.
Thank you very much, Rumbidzai. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. I hope we are all well. The conversation has been going on well. The fact sheet on gender and social norms on women's political participation and representation, really focusing on violence against women in politics and intersectionality with social norms and how social norms determine women's participation and representation, but also how violence against women deters them from thriving and living their full potential as political leaders, is one that got me to really reflect on the importance of social norms that determine what is acceptable, what is normal, and what is appropriate on how women should behave. I want us to have this at the back of our minds as we proceed. But I do want to acknowledge and thank the International IDEA for this opportunity to really research and consolidate key current information on this. Rumbidzai, Sifiso Sami were quite helpful and guided, the focus. I do want to appreciate Salman for a very, very thorough review of the fact sheet and guiding it. And definitely got me thinking around what is important to say in this fact sheet over and above what we might already know. So I'll delve into it now and just share that the outline really looks at, which is not what I'm going to focus on, but I'm going to focus on key highlights and look at key aspects of the outline of this fact sheet. The fact sheet covers key concepts, forms of unprogressive, and I intentionally use the word unprogressive social norms because there are social norms that can facilitate and support, as Salman has unpacked earlier. It also looks at the problem, the prevalence, the scope of violence against women, violence against women in politics and political participation and representation, looking at key data globally and zooming in on regional dynamics. How social norms also sustain violence against women in politics. We will talk through snippets of that in the session. Why this is happening and why it's been sustained, what the implications are. But more importantly, I was able to come across the promising practices, looking and guided by the ecological model around promising practices at individual levels, because that is where the transformation needs to start. Community level, legal recognition of violence against women in politics, and institutional accountability measures that have been taken that can be learned from. And all these informed key recommendations within the framework of prevention and social reforms, response, accountability, advocacy, and policy reform. But I'm also looking at all of this ahead of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda, and also now asking what is going to happen and what could happen beyond, because as statistics in this presentation will show, we are really way behind from achieving any targets set around Sustainable Development Goal 5 or Goal 16, around promoting gender equality, women's rights, reducing gender-based violence, which directly links with violence against women in politics, but also ensuring gender equality and equity. So we'll just zoom in a bit more around the nature of violence against women in politics, which really looks at the acts of gender-based violence, including coercion, intimidation, stigmatization, targeting women because of their political participation, with the aim of stopping or preventing them or excluding them from public leadership. And we have a lot of information from the IPU and UN Women that give us current information around how this manifests on an annual basis. I then got to zoom into how this actually manifests, this violence, this coercion and intimidation, clustered into 4 key areas. And these 4 key areas are presented here from the most prevalent to the least prevalent. The most prevalent forms of violence against women in politics, manifesting in multiple reinforcing forms. So this is to say these 5 areas actually work sometimes at the same time on the same woman, typically occurring following the order from the most prevalent, as I've mentioned, to the least prevalent. We have psychological and emotional abuse. The most prevalent form of violence against women is the one that is sometimes difficult to show evidence of, except one has the money, the financial muscle to go to a psychologist and get a psychological report, which is not common in most of our more local, more financially affected countries and communities, in the form of insults, intimidation, sexist remarks, shaming, humiliation, threats of rape, or even death. And that shows with the high levels of femicide, of killing, as a result of preventing women from thriving in leadership. We also see manifesting through or at public debates, often becoming arenas where women's bodies, their character, or their family life are used as tools to attack them, rather than listening and picking out their political ideas, what they are contributing and bringing to the table, their value add, and therefore causing them depression, burnout, and self-censorship. And in most cases, what tends to happen, women withdraw. They cannot deal with the shame. We also have an emerging form, technologically facilitated gender-based violence that we see occurring through fake videos, through manufactured photographs, doxing, deepfakes, hacked accounts, and that is gaining traction, especially in this age of artificial intelligence and the fast use of online platforms and social media platforms, where things, words and statements and videos go viral so quickly. Then we have economic and political exclusion, which comes third in line in the nature of denial of campaign financing, campaign support. Women still struggle to get finance to support their political careers. They don't get support from their parties. Some have to become independent, and it's very difficult already in a highly masculine society to then be a leader as an independent. So they don't get party support, they don't get support from other funders merely because they are women. There is bias, and that limits women's ability to participate and advance. Then we have sexualized insults and body shaming linked to the psychological and emotional abuse, which comes tops through gendered slurs, objectification, derogatory narratives, always picking on what women wear, how they look, what is long enough or not short enough. And then we have physical violence and threats. And this came out as last on the list of prevalence. And I would say mainly because, and literature just also shows, mainly because physical violence can be detected, can be evidenced. You can show where someone has been punched, slapped. There are marks, there are photographs that can be taken. And because of that, that in itself acts as a deterrent to perpetrators, because they know it's easier to show that evidence of sexual assault, of physical assault with grievous bodily harm, and so forth. So this have emerged as the key forms in that order. The fact sheet then also looks at the prevalence, the scope, and we know that persistent overrepresentation of men in politics actually shows how very little space women have in leadership position, holding only just about 23% of seats in national parliaments or assemblies. 82% of surveyed women in various global data, including IPU, latest 2025, showing women parliamentaries, 82% of surveyed women parliamentarians globally report experiencing psychological violence. It's quite high. And then there's the online or technology facilitated, which is the fastest growing form of violence against women in politics, at about 60% of what is reported. Because we also know that most of the issue, most of the experiences women face are actually unreported because, like I said earlier, cannot be evidenced enough. Then 30% of women MPs have considered leaving politics due to harassment or violence. Women hold only about 27% of parliamentary seats globally, and countries with stronger sanctions or sanction mechanisms show improved reporting and accountability. Higher levels of women's political participation correlate with stronger governance, and it's important to note these as we get to the recommendations at the end. Overall, the attacks that silence women actually reinforce discriminatory social norms that position leadership as masculine. With all that said, we then looked at the regional scope. What is the data telling us? And for global prevalence, I zoomed in on the regional scope on how these forms of violence against women actually manifest. For Africa, for instance, we have women candidates who face high rates of election-related intimidation and sexual violence, especially during primaries and campaigns, so that they don't even get to the point of being on the voters' roll. In Asia Pacific, there is high prevalence of digital misogyny and disinformation targeting women candidates, and it's increasingly sophisticated with the videos, the fake videos, especially during national elections, then resulting to a lot of withdrawals. We have in Latin America political-related femicide and forced resignations, where these have been documented, and Bolivia reported some of the earliest and most recent, most severe cases. Middle East and Northern Africa, there are women in politics who face intense online harassment and smear campaigns. In Europe, there is high prevalence of physical violence. While physical violence is less common, psychological and online harassment remains quite widespread, of up to about 52%. But what is really important to note is the high prevalence and fast-growing technology-facilitated violence against women in politics. And what is also quite scary is that it enables an always-on harassment beyond borders. Because with online, you don't have a geographical boundary. You share a video on X, it goes viral to all platforms. So that always on actually intensifies the severity of violence against women in politics. And then we looked at how social norms actually sustain all of this. It's really those mechanisms of power over and power within. We've already talked about the power of power in itself and how that can make or break a person, and how that can influence their mental state and emotional stability, and how that is used to influence individuals, institutions, and networks seeking to maintain control over political spaces. Women are punished for stepping outside prescribed gender roles. There are institutional responses that reinforce rather than deterring. And these are seen through male-dominated party cultures that tolerate sexist jokes, harassment, and exclusion, the bystander effect that has been shared, media environments that sensationalize women's mistakes while downplaying men's, double standards that punish women for traits celebrated in male leaders. There is silence and withdrawal by the victims that also goes unabated, except by some of the quite promising programs that try and empower women to speak out and do something about the violence that they undergo. Political parties often prioritize reputation over accountability and rather ask the woman to step down instead of supporting them. So violence is normalized as a part of politics. It's the game. I think that is the common saying in most regions globally. So why does this happen? The key drivers, they are really mainly two, is that entrenched patriarchal and political culture and norms where, for instance, women face gatekeeping, as already been said. They are being told to wait for their turn, denied nominations, or relegated to soft policy areas, and not at the forefront as they should be. There's also tokenism, which persists with women included for symbolism, to just say we have quite a number of women, we've met the quota. But even in that team of leaders that have been chosen, which positions are the women taking? They are probably the ministers of social welfare instead of being the president. We have political cultures that reward male dominance. How? We have instances of politics being masculine, equating authority with toughness and dominance. If someone speaks in a certain manner and overpowers others, they are seen as good leaders because they've shown their force. And women who challenge these expectations actually then face hostility and told to shut down. So there are double standards, potentially trapping women in a normative paradox and fuels hostility against their participation. So the key drivers, again, I've mentioned media as a secondary victimization platform and tools, both traditional and digital media, often amplifying misogynistic narratives. There are sensationalist reporting cases which have fueled online abuse. We have, for instance, a young woman in Eastern Europe, a counselor from the Wyde dialogue, saying, "The media published comments about my weight and clothes instead of covering the policy I was presenting. That online article became the source of thousands of abusive comments." So this just shows how this unfolds. Some key promising practices that should really, that are unpacked in the fact sheet, but we look at these within the framework of impact at individual, community, and societal systemic level, looking at individual resilience, shifting community norms, building institutional accountability, and enabling legal and policy reform. There are some really promising examples that are currently happening in isolation, but can be looked at to scale. We have, for instance, in Mexico, the National Registry of Sanctioned Persons. With such a registry, there is a go-to platform to see who these perpetrators are that have that should not be considered, that have been causing violence or perpetrating violence against women in politics. In India, we have deepfake takedown protocols that were established, requiring rapid removal of manipulated content, as reported by the ECI. In Bolivia, there's the Law 243, I think that is the most common, which has actually criminalized political harassment and violence against women. In Kenya, we have gender-sensitive electoral policing. There are hotlines for quick reaction. There are reporting desks. In Tunisia, there are political parties with codes of conduct prohibiting GBV, gender-based violence in politics. Australia has an Online Safety Act and e-Safety Commissioner and mechanisms to address image-based abuse and cyber harassment. In New Zealand, it's parliamentary conduct reforms. And in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, we have gender audit toolkits that are actually used within political party support. There are more that are then unpacked in the fact sheet at individual level, really looking at those that promote skills, safety, and leadership. I won't go through all in the interest of time, but really to amplify the Wyde Young Women's Empowerment Academies and how these have formed spaces for empowering and supporting that power within, building women's resilience and empowering them emotionally to be able to deal with those psychological attacks that are received that try to put them down. We also have UN Women's Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces Initiative, the National Democratic Institute and the Not the Cost campaign, Women in Politics, capacity building workshops in Europe, Eastern Europe, and Central Africa that include modules on digital hygiene, personal risk assessment, and coping mechanisms. Again, trying to support building that power within of women leaders. And in Canada, we have the Equal Voice organization that provides campaign readiness and harassment resilience training. So a lot of trainings trying to support women to be able to deal with, and I would say fight, the challenges that they are facing out there. At the community level, it's quite important to shift those harmful social norms, those norms that try to put women down through effective approaches that include mixed gender dialogues, male champions, and I think this is where Salman comes in strongly to say, how do we empower men to appreciate that their role, not just to be giving a token space to women, but to actually acknowledge that women have a right to share the space of leadership. So we have participatory engagement involving women, men, and community leaders. Community leaders, traditional leaders, faith leaders, interfaith leaders have a critical role because they are the custodians of most culture, traditions that then shape our social norms. So any intervention should really focus on influencing and working with community leaders as partners. Evidence shows that community dialogues and campaigns can reduce stigma and increase acceptance of women's leadership. Engaging men and boys, particularly as traditional and religious leaders, party officials who are men, family relatives, and media practitioners who are men, is quite critical as their public endorsement, but also public display of allowing women to take over the spaces that they equally deserve is quite key to also make that statement. And I think this point is where we need to read, the male dialogues fact sheet and really unpack the statement. Strengthening women's networks to provide peer support, collective advocacy, and mechanisms for documenting and responding to violence reinforces prevention and accountability. Documentation is quite critical because in the justice system, documentation provides evidence that can then be used in the court of law to actually bring perpetrators of violence against women, no matter what form it is, even online, to book. Other promising practices around legal recognition and violence against women and institutional accountability measures really look at the electoral monitoring bodies, law enforcement, judicial stakeholders within each country, and how these can also intersect or coordinate with regional and global fora. There are a lot of lessons that can be learned from regional and global platforms, and also holding governments and regional bodies accountable to ensure prevention first, but also that adequate response and timely response through ensuring that documentation, reporting, investigation, and also advocacy for sanctions where they need to be. So a lot of work needs to be happening even at UN level, where certain mechanisms can be put in place in countries that are really violating the human rights of women leaders through violence against women in politics. There are, again, promising practices around legal and promoting accountability, like in Bolivia with Law 243, where that law specifically provides as a first, actually, that legal framework that criminalizes political harassment and violence. In Mexico, there's the federal reform on political violence against women, which incorporates violence against women in politics into electoral and criminal codes and establishes enforceable sanctions. In Peru, there is Law 31155 of 2021, which formally recognizes and sanctions political harassment against women candidates and elected officials. And then in Panama, we have the establishment of penalties for political violence again and targeting women candidates. So there are mechanisms as well, such as the women's situation rooms and early warning systems that need to be scaled up consistently. These support real-time monitoring and documentation and therefore response, but are frequently limited to mediation. So what is important with these is there is need to link these with a stronger policy, legal framework where documented acts of violence against women can actually be charged as criminal offenses and perpetrators brought to book. Then just a few more. Yes.
If you can conclude maybe in 1 minute, please.
Thank you.
Please.
Then, thank you. Just to emphasize on the importance of capacity building of all these institutional role players to ensure enforcement and alignment. The key recommendations are really around prevention. A lot needs to be done around prevention, which links to addressing social norms, looking at gender transformative programs, programs that supports digital literacy of media, the early warning systems. Around response, we need to look at survivor-centered reporting, addressing online violence, operationalizing protection and referral pathways, law enforcement, capacity building, and interagency cross-border coordination is quite critical. Around accountability, we need to really support political party codes of conduct and institutionalize those, strengthen investigative, prosecutorial, and judicial capacity, establish public accountability mechanisms, and also the election monitoring systems. That needs to be scaled up. We have women who say we want to lead, but we need systems that protect us. And this can only be done a lot through advocacy and policy reforms, with most of these that have already been highlighted, but really looking at legislation that can be used for punitive action. Thank you so much. Apologies for going a bit over.
Thank you, Maria, too. I think this was needed, and at the end of the day, we appreciate the issues and, of course, what you have highlighted in terms of this fact sheet, the issue of violence against women in politics or women who are politically active. Because I always say sometimes we pay attention to the women who are candidates, like for elective positions of power in decision making, such as parliament level, but they are mobilizers, they are party members who are also targeted, and it's very critical to address that. The issue you highlighted on the context and prevalence, I think the prevalence, the numbers speak, because sometimes it's underestimated because there's this notion that, but is it really happening? But we see from the figures that you have, the data that you have shown, that there is the high prevalence. And even though that is high, we even understand and know that there is underreporting, which remains a problem. And you picked up the issue of traits, how traits of being, strong and firm are celebrated in men who are in politics and leaders. But when it comes to women, that can then translate into them being subjected to violence and being told that they are too much. And the drivers of violence against women in politics, which connects with the issue of social norms, but also what you shared about the promises or promising practices at the individual, community, and institutional level. I would really like us to make sure that we can be able to cover off all our fact sheets. And with this in mind, may I kindly request that we move on to the fact sheet to be presented by Caroline, the one on the global context and status on young women's political participation and representation, because these are very connected, because even the context and the status also is influenced by issues such as violence against women in politics. It's also influenced by the levels of male engagement and resistance, which intersects with gender social norms that are discriminatory. Can I call upon Caroline, please, to share her reflections or highlights, main highlights in the fact sheet? Hopefully we can do this again at least in 20 to 22 minutes so that we can leave time for some discussions, because we have discussants that are lined up and they've already prepared for their inputs. So I kindly ask Rachel, Jessica, Savera, Chikas, Ali, and Navideta to bear with me so that we can hear from Caroline, and we'll take up all the conversations after that. Caroline, please, over to you.
Thank you. And can everybody see my presentation?
Yes, at least I can see it.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you as well, Rumbidzai and your team, for allowing me to do this important research on young women in politics. And also to Bina Maseno, who provided the feedback and the peer review on my fact sheet, which was extremely helpful. I'm going to jump right in since we don't have too much time. I want to just quickly, what my fact sheet does is it goes over the status of women in politics, situating young women within that, and then identifies key barriers for them, in particular looking at the private sphere where gender norms are most impactful, and then provides a quite extensive list of recommendations, which I won't go into too much detail on, but the fact sheet itself has a lot of recommendations across the different levels. Trying to change my slide. Perfect. So probably as many of you know, 2025 was a key milestone for women's political participation and women's rights generally. It marked 30 years since Beijing's declaration and 25 years since UN SCR 1325. With women's representation in politics reaching a historic high of 27.2% globally. At the same time, we are started seeing and are continuing to see progress slowing amid democratic backsliding and rising authoritarianism around the globe, which is happening in parallel to rollbacks in gender equality and women's empowerment. Young people under 30 hold just 2.8% of parliamentary seats, and young women only 1.2% of those seats, and that number is declining, making young women some of the most excluded among all populations. And then young women are even lower in lower levels of representation when they have intersecting marginalized identities. The data shows that if the rate and sort of the data stays the same, it will be at least a century before we can ever reach parity. It's important to understand that evidence is very clear that young women do not lack political ambition. They face barriers translating their ambition into pathways to formal politics, with young men and women actually expressing very similar levels of ambition when they start out. Pre-academy data from the Wyde Women's Leadership South Asia Young Women's Empowerment Academy reflects this very clearly. It showed high ambition among the participants in different areas, including advocacy, political party leadership, and running for office. But they all as well confirmed that they had limited access to actual political institutions and translating this interest into formal leadership and representation. When young women do participate, the data shows that they are much more likely to engage through civic activism and social movements, while young men enter formal political pathways earlier and more easily. As a result, we see men building experience, networks, and visibility over time, while women's participation is less likely to translate into formal leadership opportunities. In today's context of global democratic backsliding, as I mentioned earlier, and rising authoritarianism, where there are nearly 3/4 of the world's population now living under autocratic rule, increasing women's political participation overall is not just something that's nice to have, it is very essential. The evidence shows that it leads to much more resilient, responsive, and peaceful democracies. Evidence also shows that greater women's political participation is associated with greater responsiveness to citizen needs, more durable peace, and stronger coordination and collaboration across political divides. And these political divides are often the ones that are leveraged to create social cleavages and roll back democracy and human rights. Young women in particular play a critical role in advancing social justice issues, such as climate justice, social equity, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and they are often at the forefront of democratic renewal efforts. So excluding women, including young women, not only limits representation, but it significantly weakens democratic legitimacy and resilience at a time when both are very much under threat. Unfortunately, political systems reward early and continuous engagement in formal institutions, such as political parties or electoral processes. But in many contexts, women enter political life much later in their life, often after raising children, which is when they finally gain greater freedom of movement, decision-making power, and community legitimacy. Too often, young women are selected out early due to barriers that begin very much in the private sphere, including in their homes, their schools, and their broader communities. Gender socialization heavily influences young women's self or forced selection away from institutional politics long before they actually have the freedom to pursue it. Those who enter politics at a later stage enter with fewer years of experience, weaker networks, and less time to build political capital. They are placed at a significant disadvantage compared to men who often begin much earlier, as I noted. Young men are more likely to enter parties and leadership pathways very early. They face far fewer barriers in doing so, and social norms reinforce rather than undermine young men's participation, which is very different from young women. This creates very much an intergenerational gap between men and women in politics that continues to self-reinforce through socialization early in life and power accumulation over time by men in politics who are entering earlier. Efforts to advance women's political participation often focus on formal entry points, such as candidate selection, political party engagement, etc., which are very important. But many barriers for young women emerge much earlier in their personal, relational, and community contexts, where social norms and gender norms play a far greater role in their pathway towards formal political participation. At the young stage, the formal rules, even if they are very robust, are not actually as impactful on their ability to continue down the pathway towards political participation. A more effective approach requires addressing these early norm-driven barriers alongside formal political reforms to build a stronger, more sustainable pipeline of women leaders, one in which younger women have equal ability to accumulate power and experience alongside their male counterparts, as well as enter political processes and institutions that have enabling environments. So in that sense, we still want to continue building the enabling environment and addressing social norms in political institutions, but simultaneously, we need to be doing the work in the private sphere, in the household, and in the communities and in schools. At the individual and household level, the family is consistently shown to be the most intentional arena of early political socialization. Girls are less likely than boys to be encouraged to view politics as a viable career path and instead observe and internalize unequal divisions of labor and caregiving roles in their home. Parents play a particularly significant role in shaping adolescents' beliefs about who belongs in public life and who belongs in the private sphere, which directly influences young women's confidence, autonomy, and political ambition, as well as that of men's. At the institutional level, schools, sports, and other daily cultural systems function as foundational sites of political socialization. They shape young women's exposure to civic knowledge, leadership opportunities, and early participation in decision-making processes. These environments often reproduce gendered expectations, with boys encouraged to be competitive and public-facing, while girls are steered towards supportive or care-oriented roles. And this is the same in established democracies as well as emerging democracies. It's really global in terms of how this happens. Formal political institutions then reinforce male-dominated pathways as well. They privilege early and continuous engagement that young men are more likely to access, and they often reproduce the same unequal gender norms and power structures that manifest in the private sphere. At the community level, peer networks, civic activities, and media environments further reinforce gendered patterns and norms for political participation. Girls receive much less political information, they tend to engage in fewer political discussions, and they face greater social policing of their public visibility than boys. Cultural narratives and media portrayals reinforce the perception of politics as a masculine domain, while the persistent underrepresentation of women in political leadership limits the availability of role models that cultivate political efficacy and ambition among girls and young women. And then, of course, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, violence is used very effectively to enforce traditional gender patterns of participation and power across all levels, from the private to the public sphere. Harassment, shaming, and abuse are used to discipline young women who challenge gender norms. That deters their participation. They experience this in the household, as well as their community and at the institutional levels. And then, as mentioned as well, technology-facilitated gender-based violence targeting women in politics very much amplifies these risks. It creates a chilling effect that discourages women from deciding to enter politics as they see what's happening to other women. It's very visible, and they tend to opt out instead of taking the risk on to be harassed as well online. Advancing participation of young women requires action across multiple fronts. Strengthening formal institutions is necessary, but not sufficient, as I mentioned. Being able to shift the way men and women view societal gender norms can help to strengthen formal rule change, as well as it disrupts the reproduction of unequal norms and misogyny within these public spaces. In addition to strengthening legal frameworks, such as political party rules and so forth, and doing capacity building for women's leadership, intentional strategies participation and representation are extremely critical, given where these barriers begin, which is often, as I mentioned, long before they enter formal politics. Effective approaches should recognize the entry points for change will, of course, differ depending on legal, cultural, and institutional contexts, requiring different sequencing and emphasis rather than different goals. So, for example, in contexts where you have really good formal rules in place and high levels of education and so forth, young women may be able to exit their household and participate, but once they get into schools and the broader community, they'll still face extreme social barriers. Media, of course, plays an outsized role in shaping gender norms. It reinforces or it can challenge how women's political participation is perceived. It can be used strategically to redefine leadership and masculinity by shifting coverage away from sexist framing and increasing women's representation in media leadership and ownership. In the current context of online disinformation, where gendered narratives are used to undermine and threaten young women in politics, media is really a critical area for intervention. I think it's important to note that with media, we're also, not only are we combating technology-facilitated violence that's really targeting women as women to stop them from participating, but we see increasingly gender disinformation, which leverages gender norms to attack women in politics, less so to stop them from participating and more so to actually influence policy, peace, and political outcomes. Importantly, engaging men and boys is very essential for, and as mentioned earlier in the first presentation, along their life cycle as well. So not just engaging young girls, but engaging young men at the same time with earlier interventions, being able to interrupt gender socialization before and as young men enter in politics, in the hopes of breaking a cycle of unequal gendered power dynamics. The evidence shows that masculinity becomes much more rigid and much more costly to challenge once men actually hold elite political power. So this means that early and intentional engagement with young men is really critical. Preventative engagement with boys and young men, particularly in spaces where masculinity is formed and policed, such as sports, schools, and informal play, can offer a high impact opportunity to shift norms before political identities are fully consolidated. Treating early engagement as a preventative strategy can help expand both young women's future political pathways as well as contribute to more enabling political environments for their representation and agency over time. So we see in the evidence as well as praxis that if you're working with young women and you're working inside the private sphere to create an enabling environment for them to enter politics, you want to simultaneously be working with young men so that as they enter politics and continue to accumulate power, they're doing so with a different mindset towards the benefits of shared space, shared power, and shared gender equality in political systems. One example that I wanted to share of what this might look like is something that comes out of the United States. There is a civil society organization called Men Can Stop Rape. And it has established school-based after-school clubs that provide a structured, peer-based space where boys meet regularly once a week. They have facilitators from the civil society organization that have experience in men and masculinities, and they're able to examine the pressures they're facing around being masculine and try to develop healthier alternative attitudes about how they feel about gender equality, both seeing themselves in their own masculinity as well as how they treat young women and girls. This was recognized and continues to be recognized as one of the better examples in the United States, at least, of how to shift gender norms at an early age. And importantly, the work with young men is done alongside, again, work with young women so that it is accountable to these young women. So there are parallel clubs in the schools for young women as well. And at times they will come together and actually talk and communicate with each other about gender equality and their different needs. There are a lot of other examples of this as well. And I shared a few more in my fact sheet. So in summary, young women do not lack ambition. Young men and women start out very much on equal footing when it comes to ambition, but they lack different pathways. Barriers begin early in girls' life, and if not immediately, they definitely significantly shape women's ability to enter politics, both early and then later in life as well. Expanding participation requires, as such, acting and doing interventions at a much earlier stage. It means that political participation work actually needs to be going on inside households, with family members, inside schools, and with community members, as well as at an institutional level. And it's important to understand that ensuring young women's equal access to politics is, of course, their human and democratic right, but the evidence shows that it's also really important that young women enter politics at that beginning part of the pipeline early in their life to ensure that women's political participation can actually be equitable in elected leadership in parliament and so forth. And that is important because it is a prerequisite for resilient democracies. And again, at a time of global democratic backsliding, this is something that we cannot afford to not be doing if we want to advance democracy. I'll stop there and hand it back over to Rumbidzai.
Wow, thank you so much, Caroline. I think in terms of context and global overview, it's very clear that what we're dealing with is an issue that requires consistent, systematic, and systemic transformation. And you clearly point out in your presentation that the narrative, because I think there's a narrative that is pushed a lot, that young people or young women in particular, they're not interested in politics. They have no ambition in politics. And one of the things you have proven, also drawing from the realities that we are seeing through the Young Women's Empowerment Academies, Wyde Young Women's Empowerment, is the fact that actually young women have the ambition, However, the barriers, maybe let me call them roadblocks, they are really roadblocks that are entrenched in society, starting at the household level. And as a result, the pathways are different because there are so many barriers along the way for young women, which are predominantly male. The pathways are male dominated. And one of the things I've been saying is that I think now we need to talk about the problem being the overrepresentation of men, because they dominate these spaces and they crowd out women and young women in particular. Yet at the same time, because of the patriarchal mindsets and perceptions and perspectives, you see young men being groomed and encouraged, much more than young women. You also mentioned the issue of policing of girls and women, in terms of where they can be and what they can do and cannot do, which is not the same in terms of when it comes to young men, the pipeline problem and the barriers across the different levels. So thank you very much, Caroline. I think this situates the issues in a very, illustrative way, that it's a global system. It's a complex global system. So when you see violence against women, it's a manifestation of the problems of that context and system. When you see the male resistance and pushback towards gender equality, whether they are silent sympathizers or whatever, it's a whole system that is orchestrated to push out women in all their diversity. So thank you so much for highlighting the issues. I don't think any one of us, we are about 86 of us now. At some point we were 100 on this webinar online. I'm sure all of us can see and identify, and the issues that you highlighted, they resonate. May I kindly now go back to the colleagues that I had mentioned? We would need their reflections and inputs. And I think now that we have the 3 fact sheets, we can even speak to issues across them, but please without making another presentation, because Caroline, Mariatu, and Salman have given us brilliant presentations. I don't know how to do a joint clapping and acknowledgement online, but maybe we can just all do this, or we can do the famous one, debunk, fire, power, debunk social norms. Chicas, Rachel, where are you? You are Savera, where are you? We are the architects of debunk social norms. So can I give Chicas, if Chicas is online, and Ali and Navigator, your reflections on Mariatu's highlights with regards to violence against women in politics, but I also note that there is Melina, who has been making several comments, and I think we need to give her an opportunity to also give her thoughts. But be assured that we are capturing these questions so that Caroline, Mariatu, or Salman can incorporate them if they are addressing any gaps that you are raising in your comments. So please, 2 minutes at most, Chicas. I know you're an upcoming politician, so not to do a rally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma, for this great privilege. First, I'll say a big thank you to International IDEA for the great, amazing job you're doing. And thank you so much, Mommy Rumbidzai, for the excellent moderation. I want to particularly appreciate Salman, Mariatu, and Caroline. Excellent presentations there. And listening to all of them also gives me the energy to want to keep being in politics, because I would like to quickly touch on the presentations by the 3 of them. First, I'll start with Caroline's presentation. It really hits me, and it's really a reflection of the lived reality of most of us who got into politics early, because she stated that in her presentation. I got into politics 2011, and 2011 to now has given me ample time to be exposed to a lot of the issues that were raised by Mariatu. And because this is a space that is dominated by men, I find it very critical that Salman's presentation is key, because this is a male-dominated space where the power we're seeking for, the space we're looking for in the political space is hijacked and being controlled by the men. And one key thing that I enjoy about the entire presentations is that it has helped me to understand the layers of barriers that exist to women attaining power. And those layers cannot be eliminated, or those layers cannot just vanish by mere wishes, but by deliberate actions, by policies, deliberate actions and practices, where we don't just make laws, but we have them implemented so that we move women from just participating to having actual representation. And in the context of Nigeria, with an estimated population of 230 million people and having a representation of 4.7%, it speaks to the extreme poor and very alarming state of exclusion, because you can't expect a population of over 110 million women having not the voice to speak in rooms where decisions regarding and concerning their lives are being taken. So being a Nigerian in politics, it's a life call for me that we need to have a society that respects men and women, a society that gives women the option of wanting to be in politics without having to choose their safety over the passion that you talked about. Yes, young women have the passion, but because of these layers of barriers, they already send a message to someone who has not yet come into the field to say that this space is not safe. And that is why when Salman talked about dismantling patriarchy, I feel that is the ultimate thing that should be done, because patriarchy has found its way and found a space to bring in different sectors. Because you talk about a country like Nigeria, it's a very religious environment. Patriarchy has found itself in religion, and when you speak, they say, oh, because of our good book says this and that, then you have all manner of interpretations. And the minute you try to debunk those norms, then you're seen as the outcast, then you're being labeled. And because society has placed the burden of honor on women, you even find the household that is supposed to be the first place of support for women happening to be the ones to say, oh, you don't have to go that length, you're going to bring shame to our family. I've experienced that in 2019, where they had to sit me down to say, I'm doing too much. Now people are insulting me. I'm going to be a disgrace to the family and all that. And because these issues are further emerging different forms, like the technology facilitated violence, it means that the issues that we found on the ground when we in 2011 still exist, and now they are taking different forms. So for me, having conversations like this is a good, is one of the pathways empowering people who happen to share similar stories with millions of women, because also relations, the data shows that single continent fully has all these layers of barriers. So it then means that this very conversation is needed, and the work that you're doing is quite making an impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chikas. And I think what's very important is that you are not just hearing, but you are the actors on the ground. Because I always said, and I've said it before, that, you know, myself, Caroline, Salman, Mariatu, and all of us as practitioners, we don't even have the, you know, the boldness that you take to stand in those challenging systems. I remember Savera sharing about how coming from a minority background, being the first woman to stand for election in the context of Pakistan, in a particular region in Pakistan, what that means. So as young women who are taking the steps, the bold steps, we applaud you. And we hope these resources and this kind of sharing that we have with you, it will also inspire you and encourage you, and at the same time, give you space to learn and to know that it can be possible, but we are not saying it's easy. And we appreciate and acknowledge your efforts. Thank you so much. I would like to ask Ali or Navigator, if she's online, if you have any reflections on the three fact sheets, or mostly the one on violence against women in politics and the one on the global context just shared by Caroline. Is Ali online? 2 minutes,
Yes,
please.
yes.
Bonjour, Ali.
Bonjour, director.
Ça va. Please go
Ça va,
ahead.
ça va. Okay, thank you. Uh, Based on the last year workshop and today presentation, we conclude that social norms and violence constitute barriers to the spread spread participation and representation of women in politics. In response to this situation, I have two suggestions focus on two aspects. You know all that in the weather, the percent of the population of women is more than the percent population of men. But statistically, you must have more women in politics than more men in politics. But nowadays we saw some situation. Oh, we have more women, but we have more men who take the lead in politics. Yes, but we must debunk the social norm and take opportunity to women to take the leads.
Ali,
But
would you want to speak in
yes.
French? Would you want to speak in
Okay.
French? You can speak in
Okay.
French and there'll be translation.
Okay.
So it's
Donc,
easier for you.
au vu de cette situation, moi, je propose que des initiatives comme les académies de renforcement de capacités techniques des femmes soient poursuivies et que des opportunités de financement leur soient accordées pour que ces femmes puissent mener des actions préalables qui vont renforcer leur branding dans leur communauté, ainsi que l'adhésion de toute leur communauté à leur statut de femmes leaders, de femmes en politique. Parce que naturellement, nous constatons que les hommes, depuis le bas âge, ce qu'on leur offre comme opportunité leur permet de gagner leur espace, de conquérir leur espace, de prendre une place de première position. Et c'est ça qui contribue, ou bien c'est ça qui les favorise à accéder rapidement à ces postes politiques. Or, si ces femmes-là ont les dos des capacités depuis les écoles, depuis leur communauté, elles vont mener des actions préalables. Elles seront mieux préparées même aux réalités de l'environnement politique et elles sauront également comment surmonter les défis, créer des alliances stratégiques qui vont les aider à tourner la tendance. Et c'est mon souhait d'ici 10 ans encore, nous arrivons à doter ces femmes de moyens pour préparer leur carrière politique dès le jeune âge, déjà à l'université, renforcer leur branding, tant sur les réseaux sociaux ainsi que dans leur communauté, pas seulement avec les initiatives associatives qui sont plus sur l'engagement citoyen, mais des initiatives entrepreneuriales qui renforcent leur crédibilité, le pouvoir de la femme sur tous les plans économiques, sociaux. Ça va aider à changer la tendance. Je tiens à vous remercier. Voilà mes contributions pour la présentation d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ali. And we appreciate you even set like an ambition in terms of the timeline, because we can't wait for 50 years. We can't wait for 60 years. We can't wait for 100 years. It has to happen now. Thank you for your reflections. Can I find out if Navigator is with us as well for her reflections?
Yes. Hi.
Thank you,
Hi,
Navigator.
Rumbidzai.
Greetings. Hi. Good to see you
Hi.
again.
Good to see you. Yes. And good to see Salman and everyone else. Really great presentations and a lot to think about, a lot to say, but I'll keep it under 2 minutes because I know Rumbidzai is very particular about time. So I think I'll just talk a little bit about violence against women, and I'll start with something that Mariatu shared in her fact sheet, that how the Election Commission of India has put in a rule of, taking down AI generated content or flagging this kind of deep fakes and similar content. And I feel like while that's an initiative to tackle deep fakes, particularly that are created that are created with women's images, and that's an entry, like that's how you deal with such instances at an entry level. But very recently, a very young woman politician, she's only 27 years old, and she was campaigning for the first time. And she was up against, male politicians who were like thrice her age. And they made deep fakes of her campaigning, and and it doesn't take, 2 hours is also not a lot of time for anything to go viral. So I feel like there need to be measures at the back end, like how do you deal with it after it's done. And I think there aren't enough legal recourses. Like also, so she is a woman who has party backing. She has institutional backing. She has resources. She has a social media team to handle a situation like this. But then, how does someone, if I were to enter politics, as I do have these ambitions, how would I deal with a deep fake of mine doing the rounds on the internet without a team? So I think those are some ways in, some promising practices, like you very nicely put, that we do have legal frameworks. And I think India has a lot of policies and frameworks, but as someone on the ground, as someone seeing these, play out, you realize that it's ultimately, I need to watch out for myself. It's me, and it's only, I can only rely on myself and my, supporters. So that was one thing that I wanted to highlight. And also the second thing is solidarity in political networks. So not very recently, a couple of months ago, there was a female head of state in India who was slapped by a man in a public meeting. It was a public consultation. And because of some of her policies, and she's not a very popular leader. She has had run-ins with the public, and again, memes, and just a lot of, she's found herself in these social media controversies. And when this episode happened, when she was slapped in front of a security, and like nothing happened. I mean, like the security couldn't do anything. It just happened so soon. And it made people realize how this would have never happened with a male leader, because they have, and when men are, when we see politicians, we see their security first. We see they're always guarded with their men. But somehow this slip up happened in the case of a woman. But what was striking was that in our context, and probably relevant to others here as well, that solidarity always happens at the cost of political affiliation. So that moment couldn't garner solidarity from women of other political parties. And somewhere we become politicians first and women later, or politicians first and citizens later. And I think that is something which really limits us and does not let people really come out, because women across the board, across left, right, they do face violence and discrimination, and of course at different levels. But there is no solidarity, and they would rather get oppressed in their own party than come out and show solidarity for someone who is on the other end of the ideology. So I think these are some things that I just wanted to share, and some things that I observe in my own environment as a political worker and as a leader. So yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nivedita. It's always good to have your reflections. And I'm just seeing the richness of what we are discussing here, from, the examples, the experiences of chicas, your experience, Nigeria, India, and having Ali also sharing in coming in as a young male gender equality advocate, and the other previous speakers, Ibrahim, who also shared their thoughts. And one of the things that comes to mind, especially about what you highlighted, is I'm wondering, Caroline, Salman, and Mariatu, how do we address the point that Nivedita is raising about solidarity across political party lines or across political party divides? And it's not just about violence against women. When it occurs, I'm just like, wow, how does a man have the audacity, to slap a woman, you know, e- even a political leader, your equal, to say you have that power over them? How can we address this issue of collaboration and solidarity across political party lines on matters of mutual interest to women? I always say violence against women in politics, it doesn't matter whether you are from political party blue or yellow or green, it's still violence, and it's meant to dehumanize you and tell you that this is not your space. We'll slap you so that you can be out of this space. So I hope I'm putting this as a challenge to Maria too, Caroline and Salman, to see how we can address it. But also the point that you mentioned about dealing with the effects, where, like, for instance, the deep facts thing, okay, dealing with that, how exactly do you deal with that at an individual level? So that, the recommendations that we are coming up, Maria too, and Salman, and also Caroline, they're not just at that level, but how do we deal with these practical illustrations that Nivedita has really shared with us? Thank you so much. May I turn to Sphera? I hope she's online for your reflections and thoughts sharing as well. I had asked that you will have Severa, and I'm trying to see where I've written the names. Please pardon me. But Severa, can you please make your
Yes, Rumbi.
interventions if you are online?
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Severa. And then it's Rachel and then Jessica. Please go ahead.
So I'll
Greetings.
be very short. First of all, thank you for having me. This is a very important conversation, and all the presentations were very compelling, and it some sort of bloomed some hope in me as well, because of the practical steps that were discussed that protect women because so I'll start with my introduction. I come from Bunair, a very conservative rural district of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan. I contested general elections as Pakistan's first non-Muslim women ticket holder, making history in Pakistan. But it came with a a price tag. So I faced violence on different levels, harassment, digital violence, objectification, double standards, everything, you name it. I faced it within the past 2 years. And everything, as was highlighted, mentioned before, it didn't target my policies or the way I was representing my people or the communities I was representing. It was only targeted to towards my gender, being a woman, being a religious minority, and being young. So it was targeted to these identity labels. And basically I was even there were assassination attempts and like you name it, everything has happened here to me. So but I couldn't share any of it online or with my party or anything, because if I shared it, I would have faced more backlash. I knew it. To party basically to even participate in the politics and to contest, I had to change everything about me. I never used to wear a scarf or anything, but to participate I was covered from head to toe. And still today, um whenever I have to go out to public spaces, I have to cover. And there's a specific image, as mentioned before, the objectification of women. So like I'm objectified and I have to follow if I even want to be have any chance at all to be accepted as a political candidate here. But to me, all this violence, it's not about harming one specific person. It's about discouraging other women as well. And as I see it, this participation in politics and women empowerment overall, we need protection, because like without protection, it's simply exposure. And as I said, it gave me hope hearing about the practical steps taken by different countries, including the policy and legal steps, institutional and the rapid response systems. We need to normalize these things in and advocate for them in our countries and the spheres we are working in as well, because as mentioned before, that we have normalized this harassment and intimidation and objectification as a part of politics. We have to address this as well, to even have this chance to participate in politics or have a voice that others would care to listen to, be heard at all. So thank you for giving me the chance, and I hope.
Thank you so much, Savera, for speaking to the lived realities in terms of your experiences, which is why, again, I repeat how, at a personal level, I applaud young women like you, Savera, young women like Chicas, like Navigator, like Rachel, who have stood up and said, we are going to claim our space. And there are many of you who are doing it. So we really appreciate that when we're talking about violence against women in politics, and in particular for young women, it's not imaginary, but that's exactly the lived reality for so many young women across the world. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like that. That's the issue. It shouldn't be like that. Why are we normalizing this? That's the problem, which we need to continue confronting. I was learning something recently in one of the conversations, that we should never give up on gender equality and women's empowerment. And it should not be a cost, connecting to the NDI campaign, which Caroline has been part of. It should not be a cost. This is not what women have to pay for in order to exercise their human democratic right for participation and representation. So thank you for your reflections and affirming that the issues that we are addressing in the fact sheets are real, and we need documentation on that and the strategies and recommendations to address them. Can I please ask Rachel to share your reflections as well as a young woman activist politically and also in civil society? Rachel, your reflections in relation to the fact sheets on violence against women in politics or on the global context and status for women, young women's political participation and representation. Rachel is on mute, so maybe whilst she sorts that out, if she's not responding now, can I have Jessica? Is Jessica on? Hello, Pierre, did Jessica join? Can someone confirm? I can see Rachel is online, but she's still on mute. You need to, she needs to unmute herself if she's going to speak. If Rachel and Jessica are not available, can I please give the floor to, or the opportunity for reflections, maybe just to tie up before we conclude? I have seen several comments that are in the charts, and I hope we can be able to pick these up in terms of addressing or finalizing the fact sheets. I see there is a comment from Wina. I'm not sure if Wina and Zaira. Zaira, would you like to share your thoughts? Zaira Pinto, if you're online. And then after Zaira, I'll give the floor. Is Zaira online?
Zaira is online, but she's in the chat. So let me see if I can. Yeah. Should be able to talk now, Zaira.
She can speak in Spanish, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have Spanish.
¿Puedo en español?
Sí.
Yes, you can
Bien.
speak in Spanish.
Bien, perfecto. Bueno, yo diría primero que nada agradecida por lo de hoy. Acá en Panamá fue desde las 6 de la mañana. Me parece sumamente interesante todo el tema. Evidentemente estoy aquí como con el inglés, ustedes saben, ¿no? Entonces tengo como el traductor y todo. Pero yo sí quería agradecerle de verdad todo las personas pues que han participado hoy con los diversos temas, porque en realidad desde que yo la conocí acá en Panamá usted nos ha brindado como este espacio de ideas que han pasado, pues. Por ejemplo, muchas hablaron sobre sus experiencias, sus realidades y que a la final no está lejos de cada uno de nosotras las que somos mujeres políticas, de las que estamos sobre todo en este tema de Latinoamérica. Y siento que estos espacios que abren, me siento en un sentido bastante afortunada y privilegiada hasta cierto punto, porque la información es poder y sobre todo contar con personas como usted, como la organización, como todos los que han estado, me parece sumamente interesante que podamos avanzar realmente todas juntas, que podamos obtener las experiencias, que podamos compartirlas, que podamos tener este tipo de espacios. Y bueno, más que nada yo podría como decirlo de esta manera. Y bueno, no sé si tiene alguna pregunta, yo con mucho gusto.
Thank you so much, Zaira, for your reflections. Melina Didi, Jobat Melina Didi, would you like to share your thoughts? Because I saw you even have a question in the chat about concrete strategies that have proven effective in preventing and sustainably reducing violence against women in politics, particularly in contexts where such violence is socially tolerated or underreported. I think the example that Nevidati shared with us, where in a public space, a woman leader is slapped or, beaten up essentially by another male political leader. It's problematic. Melina, are you online? Okay. She doesn't seem to be available. I also saw a comment, I think, from Leroy. There were some comments from Leroy. Several comments from Leroy. Leroy, if you're online, your reflections.
I have given them the permission to talk, to allow them to talk, so they should be able to respond to you.
Okay. Leroy, is Leroy online?
I see them online, but I don't see if they
are able to speak. Okay, that's all right. I also, just to acknowledge that we are seeing all the comments and the feedback. I see also a comment from Albert Ngosa, and we will. Sorry?
I'm sorry, I have network issues. I don't know if I'm missing out something, but I have network issues.
Yeah, we had asked you, Rachel, if you wanted to give your reflections in connection with the three presentations, fact sheets. I don't know if you were able to follow through the presentations, all three presentations, or one particular one that you would like to speak to specifically. But anyway, they are interconnected. So go ahead, Rachel, and then we can conclude.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. A good evening to everyone that is on. My presentation, I would just maybe want to share an example in regards to certain an example of Uganda. As Uganda, we are just from elections, and during campaign, a gentleman who was a candidate bad mouthing a woman in public on all his rallies, telling people not to vote for a woman just because when she's voted for and she goes to parliament, she's going to wet the parliamentary chairs and stain them with blood. This thing really touched me. It really hurt me, because I asked myself, if this woman is going to stain the parliamentary chairs with blood, why don't we vote for a woman who is being embarrassed like this in public than us voting for a man whom we are not even so sure that is going to sit in parliament? At least we know the woman is going to stain the chairs. I tried it. It really changed I wasn't this much interested in voting for this person, but I had to join and campaign for this woman, persuading women to show them how important it is for this woman to go and represent the district in parliament, so us should air out our voices as women, because if she's going to wait the chance and if she's really being embarrassed like this is because it once happened to her last in 2023, something like that, where she was in parliament, and maybe I don't know what happened, but she stained her cloth. And so a few people saw it. Then the few people that saw it started circulating the information, sharing, pointing fingers at her, I mean, including fellow women, doing this, shaming her, embarrassing her before fellow MPs, like before fellow members of parliament. This was really a bad thing. So now this man was using this as a technique to decampaign her, so that she shouldn't go back to parliament to stand the parliamentary chairs. Really, this was something so bad. And I saw women, many women were supporting this man. I told them, you are doing a wrong thing. If this man is really embarrassing a fellow woman before us, how about if it is your turn? Who will support you? We need to support this woman, stand by her, give her all the necessary support, because we all bleed at the end of it all. Every month we all bleed. And so if this man is attacking this one woman, it means he's attacking us all. And it really, we managed to see that this woman went through. This woman managed to win. She went through as the direct woman. She went through as a direct MP for the district, but that is because the man had used that as a mechanism to turn her down. So we use that as also as an opportunity to let people know that if she's staying in the parliamentary seat, then it means she's representing us. Let's push her to go back and represent us. So I think whenever we have these, whenever people take advantage of our weaknesses as women, and then use our what is it called? If they use our very own bodies or nature cause as a disadvantage or as an opportunity to bring us down, to embarrass us before others, I think it's always better for us to stand as one in solidarity, just like I think it was Chicas and Carol, then and Ali, some that presented about that. We need to always stand out as one, because there is no one that will come through for us if we don't come through for each other.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. And what you are pointing out, the example that, because women, because of our bodies, which, have a responsibility for reproductive purposes, reproducing humanity, when we are having during the periods of menstrual periods, that is used against you. I think we can clearly see how politics has become even weaponized against women. Just because a woman is having her menstruation and a chair or whatever, a couch is stained, someone can stand, a man, a whole grown-up man, I suppose, can stand and use that as a narrative for campaigning or decampaigning a woman or attacking a woman, instead of issues-based campaigning. And I think this is one of the things that's coming out here. How do we get politics to be about issue-based campaigning rather than people attacking people as a form of campaigning? I always emphasize that we need to move away from this narrative of politics being a game. It's not a game, because this is about the decisions that affect the day-to-day livelihoods of people, entrusting people as leaders to make decisions on their behalf. But we have a narrative that it's a game and it's a dirty game. And if you look at it, who has made this dirty? It's the way patriarchal based norms and social norms are operating in political parties, in various spheres that shape politics, decision making, and leadership. And I think this is why, as International IDEA, under the Wyde Women's Leadership Initiative, we insist that we need to debunk these social norms. I would really want to conclude by thanking all of you for your participation and for your endurance to join us for these almost now 2 hours, but to thank our distinguished resource persons, Caroline, Mariatu, and Salman, for making the time and for collecting knowledge-based substantive issues, which we hope they are not just going to be publications to put on shelves. One of the issues that we are looking at, it's the way forward, is that we want to use these knowledge products and resources as part of the Young Women's Empowerment Portal that we are developing under I Know Politics. We also want to use these knowledge products as part of informing the modules that we are developing on the Young Women's Empowerment Academies. And this connects very well with the need and recommendation for developing a pipeline of young women to come into positions of power in decision making. And may we remind ourselves that as we are doing this, the real problem that we need to address and debunk is the overrepresentation of men, which is perpetuated and driven by discriminatory gender-based social norms and the system of patriarchy that perpetuates that leadership should be male. I want to thank you on behalf of my team. I want to thank also our interpreters for facilitating us to have this deliberation, because without the power of language and communicating, we are not able to understand each other. I also want to encourage you that as an international idea under the Wyde Women's Leadership Initiative, this year we are planning to do global, which means when I mean global, we are bringing the different regions together. For instance, we have had so far, I think about 5, and we're going to do the 6th academy. So we would like to select young women from the different regions: Southeast Asia, South Asia, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, Western Africa, to come together, Latin America, to come together and be able to look at the milestones. Where are we and where are we going, and what is it that we need to continue to see happening? One of the issues that we believe we also want to work on is the journey mapping. We really want to create and document the journeys of young women, including the issues relating to violence against women, creating safe spaces for young women to speak to these issues. I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to thank you for being key partners of the Young Women's Empowerment Academy led by International IDEA. I hope we'll be in touch and we'll continue to work together in the forthcoming initiatives. Thank you so much. Maybe I might also announce that on the 20th of May, we are planning a second webinar. We've got 3 fact sheets that we need to present as well. One on the role of political parties. And I know most of you belong to political parties, so may we please encourage you to sign up for the webinar that is planned on the 20th of May on the role of political parties, and the other one on the role of the media. We really need to give particular attention and focus and debunk what is happening with regards to the media. And the other fact sheet will be on the conceptual framework that we are using on access, participation, representation, and transformation. So we look forward to your participation again in the upcoming webinar on the 20th of March. Thank you so much for being part of this journey with us. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rumbidzai, and thank you all the colleagues for truly informed and informative, enlightened and enlightening, driven and driving inputs. Thank you very much. It was a great learning exercise, and it's lovely to see the faces also.
Thank you. We are taking note of the comments, Pierre, because we need to reflect on them and see how best some can be addressed by Salman or Caroline or Mariatu.
Thank you so much. Quite insightful dialogue.
Thank you, Mariatu, for making it happen. Without you, we wouldn't have had much to discuss. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye for now.
Bye.